Hello and welcome to the state of Kentucky. I'm Bruce Maples, the publisher of Forward Kentucky. We're really glad to have you with us today. We have what I think is a very timely show and a very interesting show as we talk with journalists from the Courier-Journal about their series Beyond Breonna to talk about systemic racism in Louisville and across Kentucky. Before we get to that, I have a couple of things to remind everybody of. One is, if you want to learn more about what we do, you can sign up for newsletters. It's a very simple URL, forwardky.com/email, and these are free, and we'd love to have you sign up. If you like the work we do, you can become a member, which is very simple as well, forwardky.com/join. Our paying members help us keep the lights on and pay the bills and have good content. So if you appreciate that, then be sure and do that. If you have suggestions or ideas for future topics, you can send them to tips@forwardky.com. And lastly, but not leastly, if you comment as we are doing this on Facebook or YouTube, we can see those comments and we might show them on the broadcast, particularly if you have questions. That's a great way to do it. We usually share those and get answers from our guests. So I thought about putting this show off because of the events of the week. And yet, watching the videos and looking at the coverage of the insurrection attempt in Washington at the Capitol, one of the things that many people have noticed, maybe many more people than would have noticed it 5 or 10 years ago, is the disparate treatment of these primarily white persons who broke into the Capitol versus Black people at George Floyd protests or Breonna Taylor protests, people who were peaceful, and yet many people pointed out, well, okay, let's compare this picture to the picture of what happened in Louisville over the summer. And so I thought that it would be worthwhile to go ahead and have this show. I want to, first off, before we bring on our journalists, I want to say right up front that we tried to get a number of different Black people to be on, particularly people who have been involved in the production of the series on the Courier-Journal. And none of them were able to make it today, which is extremely frustrating for me. And so I just want to acknowledge right up front that we have 3 white people talking about systemic racism, which is not at all the way I would like to have done this show. I am hopeful that I can get some other people on in the future to revisit this topic from a Black standpoint, because as much as we try to understand, as one person I worked with said to me years ago, who was Black, and we were talking about this person said, you know, I wake up in this skin every morning. And I just thought, wow, that speaks to the fact that no matter what we do, we have different experiences, and we need to try to reach across that divide and understand each other. So I want to bring in our 2 guests, Bailey Loosemore and Hayes Gardner. And I'm going to apologize again for messing up Mr. Gardner's name and calling him Gardner Hayes in one of the promos. He says it happens all the time. That may be, but I still want to apologize. I know how frustrating it has been for me when people have gotten my name wrong, but I'm sure that it's equally frustrating for you. Welcome, Bailey and Hayes, to the state of Kentucky.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
So let's first of all acknowledge the other person who's not here who yet was involved. Tell us about that person and how they were involved.
Yeah, I'll take that one. Yeah, Vita Morgan is our editor. She has been at the Courier-Journal for a very long time. She is a Black woman who did help us spearhead this project. She, worked with us from start to finish, guiding it and getting us to focus on solutions as opposed to just the issues that have been going on for so long, and clearly do have solutions that need to be considered. So yes, Vita Morgan unfortunately could not be here today. She is filling in as executive editor right now. We've got a lot going on in our newsroom. So she's got some big tasks going on right now. So she hopefully will be able to make it another time.
Yeah, it's not enough that we have this fire hose of news right now. Your executive editor has retired, and she's had to step in, and I'm sure that full plate doesn't begin to describe it.
Yeah, but she does a great job, so glad to give her a shout out.
Good. So whose idea was it in the first place? Was it yours or hers?
I think it was a little bit of both of ours. When the protests started, we did quickly recognize that this is more than just about Breonna Taylor. This is more than just about firing the officers, arresting and charging the officers who were involved in her death. This is about everything that led to that point. It's about housing. It's about transportation. It's about, all these things that we couldn't even get into in this project. And so we really wanted to talk about how we got here. And this is something that I know other reporters in our newsroom were interested in as well, but it ended up, going to Hayes and I to cover. And so it was really, I think, a conversation between all of us.
Right. And I'll jump in and add that it began, probably over the summer, probably more closer to September, because at these protest events, you realize they ranged in topics from a number of things. And I'd see protesters talking to police officers about various issues. And there were events protesting things that really did go beyond the events that led to Breonna Taylor's death. There were so many different aspects to it that we felt like the series could kind of touch on a lot of things that are important in the city.
Well, and it did. And one of the things I appreciate about the CJ under Rick Green's leadership is that the long form publishing and the series came back. It had been there at one time. It had sort of gone away. And I was both fascinated and gratified to see the series. It did cover a lot of ground. I mean, it could theoretically be made into a small book or a pamphlet or something, because it really does cover a lot of topics. I've actually got it open on my on another browser, and starting out with history about how it took root, and health and education and housing and criminal justice and employment. Most people, I think, would have said, well, it's obviously going to be about criminal justice, but you really went across the gamut of things, including what can we do going forward. What kind of response did you get to these stories as the series spun out?
I'd say responses were, they kind of ran the gamut, if you will. Some people had a lot to say about how they may have been enlightened or learned a lot from it. Right. A lot of readers said that maybe they hadn't considered some of the things that the series pointed out. Other people were not happy with the focus on the focus that the Courier-Journal has placed upon Breonna Taylor and on systemic racism in Louisville. So there were people who were not pleased with the series, other people who really appreciated it.
Did you get people who actually said, no, you're wrong, this doesn't exist?
Absolutely. I mean, even before we published the first stories, we did a call out for suggestions for solutions, and we ended up getting about 70 responses to this Google form that we put up. And a lot of the comments on that post on Facebook were, well, the answer is easy. Systemic racism doesn't exist. And so I think that it should not have been shocking to me, but it was shocking to me how many people reacted that way. But I will say that my favorite response was to the housing story, there is a woman that I featured, Quamisha Adams, who has 4 children. And she was evicted in the middle of the pandemic, not because she didn't pay rent, but because she had wrecked her car. And
Sure.
yeah, so you've read the story. She was evicted, for this reason. And a reader saw that and actually said, I want to anonymously donate to her. And he said, I'm also going to go through some of these organizations that you pointed to and donate to them as well, but I would like to give her a Christmas gift as well. And so he sent me a gift card, a Visa gift card that I was able to give to her. And she sent me a video of buying shoes for her kids, because she was like, I don't know how I'm going to get shoes for my kids. And
Right.
it's just, she was such a beautiful person, and she just seems like a really amazing person. And I was so glad that he did that for her.
So what response did you get from leadership in the city? I mean, was it resentful? Was it interested? Was it receptive? And I'm talking about all sorts of leadership, both political and nonprofit and business. Go ahead, Hayes.
I would say that as we were researching and speaking to people about the series, many leaders we talked to seemed receptive of the idea and receptive of the fact that this is an important topic that needs to be discussed. When I spoke with Dr. Neely Bindapudi with the University of Louisville, she was very excited that we were doing this series. Many other leaders in the city also, I think, were encouraged that this is being studied and written about. So it seemed receptive is how I would characterize it.
Bailey, did you get anybody who said, please don't talk about this because it makes the city look bad?
No, I didn't get that at all. I think, like Hayes said, a lot of people, and it might be, who we're going to as well, but, everyone was very receptive. We did try to focus on the people who were making changes, like Norton Healthcare, was very receptive to it, because, they are trying to, put money into the West End and into Black communities. So I think it's a little bit of, yes, who we spoke to, but it does seem like people were already making these statements and people are already being receptive to it. So I think that they were, absolutely.
Did you speak with business people, or like the chamber or the visitation bureau, or any of those people? Or visitor bureau?
We did talk to GLI, the Chamber of Commerce. They were featured, I believe, in one of Hayes's stories.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. And they also, they've done, well, more recently this year, that they've seemed to put efforts into addressing systemic racism and having a more equitable economy. So I would say that they were also receptive to the series as well.
So let's ask the Woodward and Bernstein question. How did the two of you break up the work? Did each of you take a section? Did you both work on each story? Did one of you edit the other? How did y'all do that?
We divided it up kind of. Some of the stories I did almost primarily myself, and some Bailey did almost primarily herself, such as housing Bailey did, education I focused on. And then for the intro, for example, the one that focused upon history, the first story that we really shared, and we helped each other edit and things like that.
Okay.
Yeah, we both have our own sources, and I think kind of split up the work very evenly, where we just, I've got this connection, I'll talk to them, and you've got this connection, and but also helping each other, making suggestions, things like that. So it was very, very much a partnership.
Mm-hmm. Very collaborative.
Did you have to sort of put the sausage knife to it and say, okay, we're going to cut this here because otherwise we'll be doing this for the rest of our lives?
We were hoping it would be shorter, actually.
Right.
But, I think, like you said, we stuck to the 5 topics that we picked, education, health, housing, criminal justice, and business. But then, Hayes turned in his business story and it got turned into two different stories. So
Right.
yeah, we clearly could have included transportation and environment and all these other issues that very much play into systemic racism and are affected by systemic racism. But yeah, you kind of have to, we stuck to the ones that I think there was a lot of focus on from the community.
And even within each story, there could have been even more solutions proposed. So it was tough to decide what to keep in, what's really important, including this, and what might we write about later.
The topic to me seems so much like an onion, where you just keep peeling back layers and finding more stuff. So I'm going to pull rank a little bit and say that I am slightly older than the two of you. And so my perspective on this might be a little bit different, because I can easily remember when using the N-word was not only accepted, it was normal. I mean, that was the world, and so for some of us, we sort of, up until recently, sort of thought, well, this thing is whipped because we don't have that anymore. We don't have that problem. And particularly with President Obama being elected, everybody's like, okay, we're post-racism now. And then maybe some of us got our eyes opened a little bit. How woke, to use that phrase, how woke would you two have considered yourselves going into this? And what changed coming out of it? Baylor, start with you.
Yeah, these are topics that I've covered since I started at the Courier as a neighborhoods reporter. I've always been kind of in tune with what's going on in different neighborhoods and different communities, but I mean, I had no idea. I don't think the closest I got was I did a project on food insecurity. And so that's very much connected to a lot of these issues, is, it's connected to wealth and, where you live, things like that. So I think that I kind of had that background, but I don't know that I was completely aware of how ingrained it all still was.
How about you, Hayes?
I don't have quite as much background in this as Bailey does, but I'm still, aware of systemic racism, as many people in this country are. So, aware of it, but then, but the more you look into it, and the more you study it, you realize how ingrained is the word Bailey used, which is accurate. And also, what stood out to me was lack of progress. I would have thought before this that across the board, things have all improved a lot in the last several decades, even though there's still disparities. But in some ways, that's not the case. And in the economic stories, for example, the median Black family in Louisville and nationally has essentially earns the same amount as compared to the overall as they did 50 years ago. Which is shocking, and that's something I would not have guessed at all before this series. So that was pretty eye-opening for me as we researched this.
And I think our goal with this was to show that all of these issues very much are connected, which is definitely being talked about a lot more than I think it used to be. You used to see, housing issues are housing issues, health issues are health issues, education issues are education issues, and we wanted to show that, no, these are all very much interconnected. You can't just separate out racism within education and say that's one thing while racism in employment is another. So I think that was our goal, as well as to present it in that way, that you can't just, it is one system. It's not separate systems.
I think, reflecting back on what I said a few minutes ago, I think the area where we've made progress, perhaps, is interpersonal racism. One-on-one interactions with people. Where we've made almost no progress is on societal racism and systemic racism.
I think that's what offends a lot of people. Yeah, is saying, you're a racist but they're like, I'm not a racist because I don't say those things. But it's different.
Right. So I want to get back to that, but I want to share a couple of comments. So here's Joni Prentice, one of our regular viewers. So some feedback there to say, hey, we used it, and we use it in our discussion group. And I would bet that if you knew that there are many other groups who have done some of the same things.
That's awesome.
Thank you. That's great.
She follows up with this right there with you, Hayes, about lack of progress.
Mm-hmm.
I too was struck by that. I hate using the word woke because it's become such a cliche, but there's a word from my younger days called consciousness raising. And that word or that phrase occurs to me because it's certainly been my experience. I have had my consciousness raised over the last 10 years at least. And the more that I've read things like your series, the more I see the interconnectedness of all of this. Something like wealth, not money, but wealth, being passed down from generation to generation. And you begin to realize, well, wait a minute, if you have nothing to pass down, then there's no accrual effect. And that's a real thing. So tell me, let's dig in for just a minute. What's the most shocking thing that you saw or learned or heard? Hayes, let's start with you.
In researching the series or at the protests?
No, in researching the series.
I think the most shocking thing was, well, probably the what I said earlier about the lack of progress in median income, but in a similar vein is the fact that there are fewer Black-owned businesses today than there were in 1968, or 69. You'd never imagine that there would be a step back in that, but for a variety of reasons, there are actually fewer Black-owned businesses today. So I think that really shocked me.
How about you, Bailey?
Yeah, I think the lack of progress was really shocking as well, and the fact that this project could have been published at any time, and yet it's being published in 2020. That we're still having these same conversations and pointing out these same issues. I know Hayes did a dive into the archives and found very similar headlines to the ones that we were publishing. I think it also showed the urgency as well, because the coronavirus pandemic has very much exacerbated a lot of these issues. And, we saw that housing, homeownership, Black homeownership has actually declined in recent years. I did not realize that. And so, it is getting worse. It's not getting better. And we really need to figure out why that is.
So you focused on Louisville, obviously. And I can see a lot of reasons to do that. Did you do any digging or diving or researching across the state? Was there any sort of, well, here's how it looks in Louisville, but here's how it looks in other places? Either one.
No. Yeah. No, unfortunately, we didn't do that. I did speak with Attica Scott, the state representative, and she gave me a little bit of her perspective on what it's like to be a Black female state representative. She said that she has never had one of her bills heard on the floor. They've never taken up what she's proposed. I think that there is absolutely a lot more to do with in terms of looking at both the state level and other cities across the state.
Okay. So let me, this is maybe an intrusive question, but Vita was supportive and was working with you, but I know that staffing at most major newspapers is a challenge. How much pressure did you get to wrap it up and get back to covering everyday stuff, or were you protected from that?
That's a good question. Vita and Rick was an editor at the time. They were both, supportive of this project and wanted us to focused on it. We were mostly set aside from other coverage for the last month or two. We were working on this, which is a luxury in journalism. So that was nice. And I feel like they appreciate these series. And so that was valuable.
Yeah, I would agree. We definitely got the time to work on this. And I think a lot of it came from the relationships that we'd built over the months of covering the protests. And so it was, just kind of working on that while also keeping an eye, although yes, like he said, we were protected. Of course, a few big stories came up that we did help with just because we felt like we needed to, but for the most part, we were allowed to do that.
Because you were covering the protest, you'd already built some trust with some of the people you needed to speak with.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I think both of us, just being out there and, I know Hayes went down to the protests at least a couple times a week for months. And I was out there quite a bit as well. And, also just making these contacts with grassroots organizers who, maybe weren't at the park, but were doing, their other, benefiting the movement in other ways. And I think that us being there and making those connections really, really helped this project.
Did you have anybody that you reached out to who either was suspicious or refused to talk to you?
I can't think of anyone who would fit that. No, but people were mostly willing to talk. From what I can remember, people wanted to talk.
Okay. So when I was in the corporate world, there was a standing joke about the report on the shelf. Basically, you do a lot of work, you do a lot of data gathering, you do a lot of analysis, you come up with a set of recommendations, and you present it to your boss or boss's boss or boss's boss's boss, and they say, thank you for your hard work, and then it goes on the shelf and nothing gets done with it. What are you seeing in terms of outcome of your series? Have you done any follow-up? Have you seen any progress on any of this?
It's a little early, I would say, to make a judgment on if people have taken any of this to heart. I do feel like that other things that, like for example, the Path Forward document is a big document that Black leaders in Louisville published this summer. I think a lot of people in the city, a lot of leadership has taken that to heart, and so I feel like people are listening to thoughts on systemic racism in Louisville, but ours was published a month ago, so I'm not sure if people, if we can say yet, if people have read it and digested it.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a little difficult, I think, for us to know maybe always the outcomes of our reporting, if anyone kind of picks it up and takes it, but I think we have seen a lot of people paying more attention to these issues. Like Hayes said, the Path Forward document has resulted in an $8 million Black community fund already,
Right.
And those are stories that I think you wanted to talk about, what comes next. And that's a lot of what we want to do is really taking some of these solutions, digging into them, seeing what people are doing, and, not just stopping at, okay, here's this big report, do with it what you will, but really continuing the reporting on these topics.
So let me put this comment up for you to see first. It's a long one. Growth mindset. How can we encourage people to approach the topic of race with a growth mindset? And whenever they hear that's racist, ask more questions instead of trying to prove that they're not. I think that's a great comment.
That is a great question.
You have anything you want to share about that thought, or is it just a good comment?
I mean, I remember hearing this years ago that if you attack someone personally and say, whatever it is, you're a racist, or even just like you're a rude person or anything like that, is not very conducive to making progress, but rather saying, the way you frame that, wasn't very thoughtful. Framing it in a certain way that doesn't indict the person of being a bad person will be more likely to yield good conversation. So I think the way you frame things is important, and not immediately casting the person aside and insulting them, but trying to help them maybe understand where other people are coming from. In this instance, where Black people might be coming from, given this country's history, is a way to speak with them. Bailey might have more to add.
Yeah, I agree with also maybe taking a deep breath. This is something I struggle with as a journalist when we get, very racist questions or comments. I see it as a direct criticism, of me, and really what my job should be is try to have those conversations in a way that helps them understand where I and all of the people that I've talked to are coming from, because it's not really my opinion. It's I'm just trying to explain to you like what I'm reporting. It is really difficult because I think it's really easy to kind of make it about you and maybe just trying to understand more of where they're coming from, so you can kind of combat those ideas. I don't know if it's easier said than done, I think.
Yes, definitely. I think one of the things that has to happen is you have to start with where people are. And if somebody, to be real weird about it, if you talk about consciousness raising on a scale of 0 to 10, if somebody's at a 2, you can't criticize them for not being at a 7. You got to talk to them about, okay, where are you now? So let's talk about solutions. Okay, Mayor Loosemore and Mayor Gardner, you get a magic wand, okay? You have a magic wand that doesn't matter about cost. It doesn't matter about difficulty. It doesn't matter about history. What is the one solution out of all the ones you got that you would just wave that wand and make happen right now? Hayes, I'll start with you.
That's a similar question to what I asked a lot of leaders, and they struggle to answer it, just like I think I will, because it's not that simple. But a lot of it, if I had to pick one, because we listed dozens and dozens, and each story really focused on a few solutions. So it's really important to remember that it will take dozens and dozens of solutions to reduce these gaps. I do think that if I could focus on one area, it might be education. I think that other issues can stem from that. That's still complex because other issues go into education. So it's always going to be cyclical. But if there were ways to making schools more equitable and reducing gaps between Black and white students in education, I think would be a great place to start. Okay.
Mayor Loosemore, what about you?
I think, like Hay said, this isn't a one solution issue, but I think that wealth plays into it so much, and we still have a $7, $7.50 minimum wage, $7.75, like that. It's been that way for, I don't even remember how long. I did a story on that last year, and everything was there.
It's over a decade. It's an over a decade.
Yeah. And I think that that's just not livable. I know that not everyone is necessarily making minimum wage, but they're not making a livable wage. And so I think that, you can say that a lot of these issues are also connected to poverty, and more Black people in these neighborhoods that are heavily affected by systemic racism are living in poverty. And I think that if the minimum wage was at least lifted, that could make a lot of change.
Okay. So let me share with you my shocking moment for today, which was when you shared that there were less Black-owned businesses now than before. That shocks me, frankly.
Shocking.
And I'm sitting here trying to think, okay, what would I do about that? But I think that the investment fund that you mentioned is at least a start. So, okay, one more trick question, and then we'll be done. Okay, so rather than be mayor, now you get to be spiritual leader. If you were going to give one message to anybody watching this or anybody in Louisville on the basis of what you've learned, what would it be? Bailey, let's start with you.
I think it's kind of what I was saying earlier is you really need to set aside yourself and, maybe your own issues, your own views, and really listen to what other people have to say, and really, looking at this information that is out there, that is indisputable, and saying, no, that doesn't affect me, but I need to be part of changing that.
Okay. Hayes?
I think for me, it's something that the series kind of highlighted even more for me is how important history is to the present day, how issues like redlining from decades ago and how overt interpersonal racism, like calling people the N-word decades ago was common. Things like that don't happen anymore in the same way, but those effects really linger and the roots affect generations. When it comes to Black businesses, one of the large issues with Black business ownership is lack of wealth, because Black people, for the majority of American history, couldn't accumulate wealth, or it was difficult to accumulate wealth. So those issues have effects that last until the present day. So
to everybody watching, there's an important point to make here, which is that none of this is free. I earlier put up the thing forwardky.com/join if you want to become a paying member and support our work. But if you want to continue to have long form work and good solid reporting and research and in-depth and trustworthy, then you got to go subscribe. I preach this all the time, tell people you should subscribe to your local newspaper and you should subscribe to the CJ and the Herald Leader as the two big papers in the state. Please notice the URL begins with CM dot, not just Courier-Journal, because I tried that and that didn't work. So cm.courier/journal.com special offer. And I would encourage everybody who is a Forward Kentucky subscriber and member to go jump out there and do this. It's not that expensive and it's worth every penny. So do that.
We appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, well, we could talk all day about why I'm a strong supporter of that, not the least of which was my father was a lifelong newspaper man. So I'm a strong believer in local journalism. Bailey Loosemore, Hayes Gardner, we are so thankful for your time today. We will be looking for more. I hope you'll do a follow-up on this about in fact, I'd be happy if you did a yearly follow-up of, okay, where have we gone? What is happening? What are we doing? Everybody go read the series. It's out there at the Courier-Journal, and we'll have you on again sometime. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for having us.
All right. That's the end of our show for this week. Next week, we hope we're going to have a really special guest. We'll see you next week.